The divorce papers were still fresh when my husband walked out of our home with a younger woman beside him, smiling like he had finally won. He told everyone I was part of his past and that his new life was just beginning. I stayed silent and let him believe it. But weeks later, my phone rang from the hospital, and his doctor asked me a question that changed everything. "Are you still involved in his care?" When I said no, there was a long silence before he whispered, "Then he is no one who knows what he needs." That was when my ex-husband realized leaving me was his biggest mistake. My name is Emily Carter, and I was 31 years old when I watched my 12-year marriage end with a signature on a single piece of paper. Looking back now, I realize the divorce did not begin on the day we signed those papers. It began months earlier in the small moments I tried to ignore, the late nights that became normal, the phone he suddenly kept face down, the way he stopped telling me about his day because, according to him, work was complicated. But for years, I convinced myself every marriage went through difficult seasons. My husband, Daniel, and I had once been the couple everyone admired. We met when we were both in our 20s before careers, responsibilities, and stress changed everything. He was charming, ambitious, and full of dreams. I remember sitting with him in our tiny apartment, eating cheap takeout on the floor, while he told me about the future he wanted to build. I believed in him before anyone else did. When he decided to start his own business, I supported him. When he worked late nights, I cooked dinner and waited. When he needed someone to believe he could succeed, I was there. I wasn't just his wife. I was his biggest supporter. And eventually his hard work paid off. His company grew, his income increased, and the life we had dreamed about slowly became real. We bought a beautiful home, traveled together, and finally enjoyed the comfort we had worked so hard for. At least, that's what I thought. The change in Daniel happened slowly. So slowly that I almost blamed myself for noticing. He started caring more about his appearance. He bought expensive clothes he never used to wear. He suddenly wanted to go to events I had never heard about before. And every time I asked questions, he acted like I was being insecure. "Emily, you're overthinking everything," he would say. Maybe I was. Maybe after 12 years together, I should have trusted my husband completely. Then I noticed the name that kept appearing. Sophia. She was a younger woman who worked with Daniel. At first, he described her as just a colleague. Someone talented. Someone who understood his vision. I wanted to believe him. But eventually, I started noticing the way he smiled when her name appeared on his phone. The way he defended her whenever I questioned their friendship. The way he became more excited talking about his new life than the one we were supposed to be building together. The truth finally came out one evening when Daniel came home and sat across from me at the kitchen table. There was no anger in his voice. No sadness. Just confidence. "I think we both know this marriage isn't working anymore," he said. I stared at him, waiting for him to say he wanted to fix things. He didn't. Instead, he told me he had fallen in love with someone else. Someone younger. Someone who made him feel alive again. The hardest part wasn't that he wanted to leave. The hardest part was how easily he said it. After everything we had built, after every sacrifice I made, he spoke about our marriage like it was an old chapter he was ready to close. "I want a fresh start, Emily," he said. And for the first time, I realized something painful. Daniel wasn't leaving because he had found a better life. He was leaving because he believed he had found someone better than me. A week later, the divorce papers were placed in front of me. Everyone expected me to fight. They expected tears, arguments, and desperation. But I simply picked up the pen. And I signed. The day I signed those divorce papers, Daniel walked out of our house with a smile on his face. I still remember standing near the front window, watching him place his suitcase into the trunk of his car while Sophia waited in the passenger seat. She looked excited, almost like she had just won something. And maybe, in her mind, she had. Daniel turned around one last time before getting into the car. "You'll understand someday," he said. I didn't answer, because at that moment I realized something important. I wasn't losing the man I loved. I was losing the person I thought he was. For the first few months after the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I moved into a smaller apartment, changed my routine, and started doing things I had forgotten about during my marriage. For years, Everything revolved around Daniel, his schedule, his career, his needs. Now, for the first time, I had space to think about myself. I started spending time with friends again. I joined a local book club. I took weekend trips. I learned that being alone was not the same as being lonely. And slowly, the pain became easier to carry. Meanwhile, Daniel's dream life wasn't turning out the way he imagined. At first, according to mutual friends, he was happier than ever. He posted pictures with Sophia, went on expensive vacations, and acted like he had finally escaped a boring marriage. But the excitement didn't last. The same things that seemed romantic at the beginning started becoming problems. Sophia had loved the successful businessman version of Daniel, the confident man who wore expensive suits and talked about future plans. But she had never experienced the reality of taking care of someone through difficult moments. She didn't know his habits. She didn't know his medical history. She didn't know the little things that only someone who spent 12 years beside him would know. I found out what happened one rainy Tuesday morning. My phone rang while I was making coffee. The number was unfamiliar, so I almost ignored it. But something made me answer. Is this Emily Carter? Yes. This is Lakeside Medical Center. I'm calling about Daniel. My heart immediately dropped. What happened? The woman on the phone explained that Daniel had been admitted after experiencing a serious health issue. He was stable, but the doctors needed information about his medical history, medications, and previous treatments. Information I had always managed. Information I had always remembered. Then she asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Are you still involved in his care? I was silent for a moment. No, I said quietly. Daniel and I are divorced. There was a pause. Then she said, I understand. But her voice changed, like she suddenly realized something. Later that afternoon, Daniel's doctor called me directly. His name was Dr. Harris, and he sounded professional but concerned. Emily, I hope you don't mind me contacting you. Daniel listed you as someone who knows his medical background. I don't know why he did that, I replied. We aren't together anymore. The doctor was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I never expected to hear. Emily, your ex-husband ended your care. I didn't understand. What do you mean? He explained that after the divorce, Daniel removed me from his emergency plans and changed the people listed as his support contacts. He assumed Sophia would take over the role I had filled for years. But when the hospital needed someone who knew his medications, his routines, and his past treatments, there was no one. Sophia didn't know. She couldn't answer basic questions. She didn't know which medications caused side effects. She didn't know the specialists Daniel had seen before. She didn't know the details of his health history. The doctor continued quietly. Your ex-wife won't be involved in your treatment anymore. Those were the words Daniel heard when the doctor explained that I was no longer responsible for saving him. And for the first time since the divorce, Daniel understood the difference between leaving someone and losing them. Because he hadn't just left a marriage. He had walked away from the one person who knew him better than anyone. That evening, my phone rang again. This time, I knew exactly who it was. Daniel. I stared at his name on the screen for a long time. A part of me remembered the man I married, the man I supported, the man I loved. But another part remembered how easily he replaced me. After 12 years of giving him everything, he had chosen a new life without looking back. Now he needed the person he had walked away from. And I had to decide whether the woman who signed those divorce papers would still be the woman who saved him. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. Not because I wanted to punish Daniel. Not because I wanted him to suffer. But because for the first time in 12 years, I needed to remember that his problems were no longer automatically mine. When I finally answered, there was silence on the other end. Emily. His voice sounded different. The confidence was gone. The certainty that had filled his voice when he told me he wanted a fresh start had disappeared. How are you feeling? I asked. It was a simple question. A question I had asked him hundreds of times during our marriage. But this time it felt different. I'm scared, he admitted. That was the first honest thing I had heard from Daniel in a long time. He told me Sophia had tried to help, but she didn't understand what he needed. She didn't know which doctors he trusted. She didn't know his medical history. She didn't know the small details that made his treatment easier. The things I had memorized because I loved him. Emily, I know I don't have the right to ask this, he said quietly, but I need you. I closed my eyes, because those words were exactly what I had spent years waiting to hear. I needed you, not because I cooked his meals, not because I managed his appointments, not because I made his life easier. I wanted to hear that I mattered. But now, after he had chosen someone else, those words felt painfully late. Daniel, I said, I spent 12 years being the person you could always depend on. I know. No, you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't have walked away from me the way you did. There was silence. The kind of silence where someone finally understands the damage they caused. I made a mistake, he whispered. And maybe he did. But some mistakes change everything. I hope you recover, I told him. I truly do. But I can't go back to being the person who fixes everything for you. After that conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt since the divorce. Peace. Not happiness because Daniel was struggling. Not satisfaction because he finally regretted leaving. Just peace. I realized my healing had never depended on him admitting he was wrong. It depended on me accepting that I deserved better. A few months later, I heard Daniel and Sophia had ended their relationship. The exciting new life he had chosen didn't survive reality. The person he thought would replace me wasn't prepared for the responsibilities that came with loving someone through difficult times. But by then, I had already moved forward. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't hoping he would come back. I was building a life that didn't need him. I started traveling more. I reconnected with old friends. I began doing things I had stopped doing because Daniel's life always came first. And slowly, I discovered something important. The divorce wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I finally started writing my own. People sometimes think losing someone means they have lost everything. But sometimes, losing someone is the exact thing that helps you find yourself again. Daniel thought leaving me would give him a better life. He thought he was walking toward something new. But what he didn't understand was that the person he left behind was the person who had been making his life better all along. I signed those divorce papers thinking I was losing my husband. Years later, I realized I was gaining my freedom, and that was worth more than anything I had lost.